Yeah, I have to give you some updates on that because I have a bio different now for the railroad programs that, because you're saying, well, he's General Grant, but he just doesn't look like General Grant. So this and my music are as close to me being me that I can do in this kind of work, because I've been a train enthusiast since before I could walk, and been a history nut and all that time in Civil War, and then Civil War trains, and it all just kind of came together. I worked at the Strasburg RR for about 8 years in train service as a brakeman, working towards being a conductor, because they run steam locomotives there, and they train everybody the old way, hands-on training. There's like a 7-week process. We'd meet on Saturdays for about 6 hours, do some classroom time, and we went out in the yard and we were learning about coupling cars and how to give the signals and the repercussions of not doing that correctly and telling the engine when to stop and watching it ram into cars and all of that. So trial by error, some of it, but practical app. And really gave me a deeper understanding than just being a fan who loves to watch trains go by, to really, get in there and get dirty with the coal smoke and everything else. So I did 8 years there as a brakeman in passenger service and in freight service. So I got to play with freight cars too, which was a lot of fun. And I will share with you some of my spirity experiences at that railroad as well. And then I worked at the East Broad Top a couple years after that as a conductor there when they were reviving their steam program as well. So I think I have as much practical steam experience as one can get in 2025 working on those kinds of railroads. If you have a chance to do that in your life, it's time travel, and it's as close as you can get to really being there. And then when you read about this stuff, because I thought more and more as I was collecting different kinds of ghost stories, and I knew some as a kid, that might be interesting just to share those together. So I have a ledger from the yardmaster on the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he has collected for me 5 railroad ghost stories. Or rather, he collected 4. There's one in here that I wrote. So you have to figure out which one in there. And it was serendipitous that this model was up there, because 2 of my stories deal with trains of the 1860s as well. So that gives you a good visual for that. So throughout, I hope you won't be terrified and scared and all that. There may be a little grisly at times. There may be some things you may be familiar with that you've heard in other ghost stories as well, because elements of good stories kind of transfer around. And when we get down to the end, we might have an opportunity for everybody to share. I did this yesterday in Zeeland-Opel at a retirement community, and I asked everybody there, so do you have anything you want to share? And they were all crickets. And after the room cleared, there was a couple in the back that came up to tell me a whole bunch of things, like, well, you could have done that for everybody. So tonight would be your chance to kind of sit around the fire and tell ghost stories a little bit too. So then, my first story is Abraham Lincoln's funeral train. On the morning of April 19, 1865, Abraham Lincoln's funeral train drifted out of Washington City to visit hundreds of thousands of grief-stricken citizens in 400 communities, bound for Springfield, Illinois, the final resting place for our fallen president. Folks all along the route would come by the track and line up to pay tribute as the train would pass them. Just because you were born more than a century too late for the spectacle of Lincoln's funeral train, you aren't too late for its specter. The ghost of this funeral train is said to retrace its route on the anniversary of its sad trip. The route the train took was the same route, but in the opposite direction that Lincoln took going to Washington to be inaugurated. He left Illinois, traveled through Illinois, Indiana, came up to Erie, and then skirted across upstate New York, went into New York City, came down through Jersey, crossed over to Philadelphia, and then came through Pennsylvania or through Lancaster, and then down at York on the Northern Central Railroad. So that's like 5 or 6 different railroads till he gets there. Comes down through York on this other railroad that connects to Baltimore. And in Baltimore, there's 2 different railroad stations, and they're across a little inlet. So you have to get off the train completely and be ferried across to the other set of track that will take you down to Washington. So that's how he got into the Capitol. And then when his body was taken back, they did the same route the other direction as well. So that's where we'll pick this up then. So you have a number of places you may be able to see the specter, is what I'm letting you know. Now, many people have reported that they will suddenly feel a cold rush of air on the track, seemingly out of nowhere. And then, as they look up, they see a ghostly headlight piercing the night sky. As it travels onward, they see an old-fashioned locomotive of the type such as the famous general of the Great Locomotive Chase, pulling a long, dark train of about 8 cars, the last one being the famous presidential car. That car was made especially as the official parlor car of the U.S. President, just in time for Lincoln's second inauguration, but sadly, his first and only ride would be on it as his corpse was returned to his home state in eternal rest. There is a replica of that car. It's at the Star Barn Village in Elizabethtown in Lancaster County. It was made by the same man that made two replica steam locomotives like this, that one runs at the Star Barn, the other runs at New Freedom. So they look just like this. They burn oil instead of wood. But he made these two locomotives. One of them he made to be at the bicentennial, or rather the commemoration of the Golden Spike. And it was sold and it was brought to Pennsylvania. And then for fun, this guy made the Lincoln funeral car, full-size replica. And it's a monster. Think about a modern steel coach or dining car, and it's almost that long. It's got, instead of just having four-wheel trucks like the tender here does, it's got eight-wheel trucks on both sides, sets of trucks on it. So that makes it super extra heavy. And most of the time when it was going to be pulled, they were expecting they would need two engines to pull the train with it. So in this story, a ghost train, 8 cars long, with that car on the end being pulled by one locomotive is what people are citing. Now, in case there's any doubt that what you were witnessing is an actual supernatural sight and not being fooled by some type of historical reenactment, witnesses will tell you that if you look through the windows of the passing cars, you can see the president's coffin is laid out and an ever-vigilant group of Union soldiers, which some describe as ghosts and others describe as skeletons, keep watch over the flag-draped casket as if guarding the president for all eternity. Flags and streamers attached to the train whip in the wind, but no sound is heard from them, the engine, or the wheels of the cars. Over the years, there have been reports of Lincoln's ghost train encountering a real train, and if it does, it just passes right through it as it rolls on to its final destination. Hundreds have reported seeing the ghost train traveling through the countryside, and it has been rumored that clocks and watches will stop running when the train passes by. Some reports hearing nothing but silence as this spectral funeral makes its procession. Others say they hear the mournful music playing as the train passes from the ghost of Lincoln's favorite, the Marine Band. Many claim to see smoke billowing from the stack and hear an eerie train whistle mournfully calling out to passers-by to pay their respects. So if you have an opportunity to find the track where the train is said to go, because there are many lines that still are preserved on the original route, you may be out at the right time of night or day and get to see or witness your own version of Lincoln's funeral train. This next one, now that covers a number of states there, and these stories will cross throughout the United States, but the next one deals with the train station in Newark, New Jersey, and this is the Reaper train. Another haunted train tale set in Newark, New Jersey about 1948 at the Jersey Central Railroad station in that city. The tale begins with a station master who is trying to calm down what appears to be an old vagabond running about his station and making a ruckus among the waiting passengers. When the station master talked to him, the old man claimed that the express train to hell was coming for him because he once killed a man who had cheated him at cards. The station master can only assume this old man is unwell, tries to shake off the troubling sound of his pleas for help. He wants his station area calm, and he's noticing many of the people waiting for trains or walking by are taking an uneasy notice of this old man. As the old man bemoans his perceived fate, he drifts away from the reach of the station master and ambles toward the edge of the platform, which stands beside the track. The station master takes a step toward him, but pauses, believing the old man is just a little scared, and he thinks maybe he just wants to be left alone. Now, just before midnight, the sound of a steam train chugging through the night air approaches, sounding as if it has no intention of stopping. Incoming trains will sound their bell and their whistle to warn people back from the track and to announce their arrivals. Looking down the line from the platform, the station master checks his pocket watch, and he frowned. He heard the old man cry out as he rose up from a crouching stance. "Here she comes! My fate lies before me in the spirit of the Blue Comet!" he yelled. Station master watched the old man standing up, and he worried that the guy might jump off the platform into the track, right in front of this engine that's coming. This confused the station master because he was trying to think on his feet right off of the local arrivals on the timetable at the station. He wasn't close to his office to pull up that clipboard and look, but he knew that the next train wasn't scheduled until after midnight to arrive. Without any reason, he felt the familiar vibration at his feet that a passing steam locomotive produces. But as he looked first at his feet and then to the track, nothing is there. Despite the loud sound of the engine, the tooting whistle, and the rushing wind that comes from a passing train, the station master didn't see anything traveling on the rails in front of him. More worrisome is that this unseeable train doesn't seem to be stopping as would be normal, but it's barreling along like she's the Hotshot Limited been given the highball on the main line to pass a sleeping freight. So he rushed from the station door to the edge of the platform, and he tried to pull the old man away from the tracks and to safety. But when he did, the rushing wind picked up almost to hurricane level, causing the station master to close his eyes against the leaves and ticket stubs blown into swirls all about him. He desperately tried to hold on to the old man's tattered jacket, but could only hope to find him in the sudden storm about him. This poor old man tugged away out of his grasp, gave one final terrible wail, and vanished from the station master's grip without a trace. Station master opened his eyes slowly as the storm dissipated and breathlessly looked at his watch. Turns out the express train to hell had in fact come for the old man, and had a good conductor because it was dead on at midnight. So, another in the period of the wood-burning tea kettles, as we call them. The Western and Atlantic Ghost Train. In the 1870s, a ghost train was on the line reported in Georgia newspapers. This is in the area between Atlanta and Chattanooga, which was a 97-mile stretch of the Western and Atlantic Railroad that's famous for the great locomotive chase from 1862. When Andrews' raiders came down from the north, volunteer soldiers with Andrews as their leader, stole the general at the station at Big Shanty when they were having a breakfast stop, and tried to run it up the line to Chattanooga and tried to escape, and they were chased down. So it's in that area of northern Georgia, just below Chattanooga, down into it towards Atlanta. So now, but in the 1880s, not far outside of Dalton, which is also on that line, a phantom locomotive was witnessed charging along the tracks. This 1881 article from the Marietta Journal reads as this. Imagine opening a newspaper and reading this now. A phantom locomotive. We learned that a mysterious apparition was seen one night recently, which was nothing more or less than a phantom locomotive. The narrator, whose name was withheld, was walking the track of the W&A Railroad about 2 miles from town one night last week when he discovered the headlight of an engine approaching around a curve. Strange to say, he heard no noise as the train came on, and presently he stepped from the track and waited for it to pass. He was still puzzled why no noise attended the engine's approach, and as it came opposite, he noticed that the whole machinery had a ghostly, phantom-like appearance. At the throttle stood a pale, wild-eyed engineer, while a specter-like fireman was pulling the bell rope, but no sound came from the bell. All this he observed as the train rushed past him like a shadow. He swears that the object he saw was a phantom train, of which there are several mentioned in railroad lore. And this was from the Dalton Citizen, in an edition of 1881, that the Marietta Journal just forwarded the whole article, posted on their own. So they're furthering the lore. A subsequent witness or old news? There's not much to go on here. For instance, there was only one witness, that is, unless the phantom train was encountered again, which it was in October of 1883. That's the month the North Georgia Citizen reported that an apparition previously mentioned in another newspaper had been seen again. Yet the facts of this new sighting suspiciously mirror those related in 1881. In both articles, the witness saw a headlight coming around a curve. He stepped to the side of the track where he became puzzled by the absence of sounds. He then watched the apparition rush by him. The two articles, though, now differ in the end a little bit. In 1881, the witness claimed that he had seen 2 spectral trainmen in the cab of the engine. Right? In 1883, the train is described as having been semi-transparent. And as it was quoted, objects on the opposite side of the railroad were distinctly visible. Some folks claim that even now, if you're lucky enough to visit Tunnel Hill in Georgia, near where the locomotive general was almost stolen, you can hear steam engines chugging through the mountain, and you can feel the ground shake and smell the smoke too. Now, personally for myself, a very good friend of mine that he's a former Marine, former active duty Marine, so I know he's not going to pull my leg Marine to Marine. And trainman all his life after the Corps, worked at the railroad, worked at Strasburg on the engines, and then now he retired recently from the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. And he is a fanatic of the general and the great locomotive chase. And when I did my first visit, I was so excited to come back and tell them I went. And I walked through Tunnel Hill. Tunnel Hill's a mile long. And the track is out now because they had to build a bigger tube alongside it with higher clearance for the big modern trains. But you can walk through on special occasions at Tunnel Hill. And I said, he said, did you go through the tunnel? I said, yeah, it was great. You could see the way the stones arch are in there and everything else. And I was in my Grant uniform, which made it kind of special for me as well. And there was a road race running that day. Like people were just on this 5K kind of thing. And at the end of the tunnel, on the south end, was a traffic cone with a stick and a clipboard. And all the runners had to go check their name off, turn around and come back to the tunnel. And they had strung lights through it for them to see. And I was unaware. So I'm in Grant mode, smoking a cigar, hands in my pockets, just walking through the tunnel, observing, like smoke puffing up for me as I'm walking. These runners are going by me on either side. So I told my friend Steve the whole thing. He said, yeah, but did you hear anything? What do you mean? The runners? He goes, no, like the train. And I said, no, why would he? Goes, no, I hear things when I'm in that tunnel. So then when I'm reading about these other people's accounts, it's like, oh, is that wishful thinking? Or is it just that he's so tuned into it that he actually hears it? But he swears every time he has been through that tunnel, he hears that chugga, 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 chugga. And he feels the ground. And all of us who've been on trains, you stand next to the track when one goes by, you feel it, right? And that's not a feeling that you get. It's like, well, maybe the train and now the tunnel that's active next to it. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure it wasn't that. That's a different, because diesels hum differently than steam locomotives. But, okay, they're more steady, because they don't have the rocking motion of the rods and all that. But so food for thought. And we'll get back to Steve and some friends at the museum before we're through here tonight. This is a story from Colorado and New Mexico. This is the Phantom Brakeman. It was right up my alley, learning how to become a brakeman. So you'll appreciate when you know the evolution of the couplers on the trains and the braking systems that Westinghouse figured out with air brakes and how that improves safety and everything else that goes along with trains. It was super important. Incidentally, useless trivia, the modern day coupler that the trains have, like a knuckle, was designed by a former Confederate Army major in around 1870. It became the standard for all our railroads. It's still the same coupler that's still used today. It has not been changed all that much. A little bit of casting it out of steel instead of iron, but yeah, so the technology goes back that far. But the Phantom Brakeman takes place in that period between still using hand brakes with the wheels and then engaging the air brakes as well. So this will be a little scientific, so to speak. High up on Raton Mountain is a pass between Colorado and New Mexico. Before the railroad came, this was a high point on the Santa Fe Trail between Kansas City and Santa Fe itself. Up around there, 8,000 feet above sea level, stood a wayside inn owned by Uncle Dick Wooten. In those days of wagons making the trek up and over, Uncle Dick had been a scout and an Indian fighter, guiding many parties of Conestoga wagons over that ground. As he grew too old for such a life, he settled on the mountain with an inn where new travelers could stop and rest during their treks further west. He had a 27-mile road blasted through the rock and cleared space for a huge log cabin that was a perfect oasis for those hardy pioneers. Uncle Dick put up a chain across the road by his cabin and charged a toll for those crossing the mountain. He made a good living of it, and he seemed quite content. Uncle Dick could manage most of the duties there himself, but occasionally he needed help. He found that help in a young man with red hair named Bill Rogers, who, while passing by, noticed the sheep herd that was out there needed tending. And in no time, he found himself partners with old Dick Wooten, more like a son than just a hired hand and a caretaker. In the coming years, the Santa Fe Railroad was looking for the best route west and came to see the toll road set up by Uncle Dick. They were impressed that his road was the best to suit the laying of track and made him an offer of $20,000. So you can imagine, late 1800s, that's a pretty good sum. Well, he said he had no need for so much money at one time. So he countered their offer and said he would settle for a lifetime pass to ride on the Santa Fe, riding all their trains, and $25 in groceries every month. And he called that a square deal if they agreed. The deal was made. The railroad men said they would name the first engine used over the summit the Uncle Dick, and everybody went to work. There was one additional provision, though, that Dick requested of the men, and he asked that they would hire his caretaker, Bill Rogers, because he knew the trains coming through would end his business of the toll road, and he wouldn't need that sheep herd and all that tending. So it was agreed, and Bill started working in the track gang, laying the rails over Uncle Dick's land, and by December of 1878, the first steam train entered New Mexico as it passed his old log cabin. At that point, Bill transferred to duty as an extra brakeman with his post on the summit of the pass. Bill had a company shanty on the summit, where as trains came to begin the downhill movement, he would climb aboard to assist the regular crew of brakemen on the car tops, working the brake wheels, controlling the train downhill through the dangerous curves ahead. Once they came off the mountain, the trains would slow, and Bill would climb down and jump off to catch a train headed back up to his shanty. His job was in all kinds of weather. So just imagine this kind of weather we have right now. And you have to climb up on boxcars and walk across this little foot-wide plank that's called a catwalk on the car roofs from one end where the brake wheel is.
Wow, it's moving.
What's that?
Oh, I said, wow, it's moving.
Yeah, while it's moving, exactly. And you're wearing mostly leather-soled shoes that are pretty slick. So you got to walk that catwalk, get to your brake wheel, jump over to the next car with a good, I wouldn't say it's this far from the chairs to this, but it's decent enough that you jump, and you got to aim beyond where you're going to land so you make it. And hopefully you're going the same momentum as the train does, and you make it. So it's not the safest job, shall we say. And it's, like I say, in all kinds of weather, and the winters, as you can imagine, were particularly punishing, especially in the mountains. One particular winter night, Bill waited for 3 locomotives pulling a 12-car train over icy rails during an intense snowstorm, and he was soon aboard. Bill was unaware that the regular brakemen had been reassigned, and both on board now were as green as spring grass. They didn't know they should wait to begin working the brake wheels, and that soon caused trouble on the descent off the mountain. Holding the wheel of his swaying car that he was atop, he tried calling out to them over the wind, crying out to go easy, but they couldn't understand him, or they didn't seem to hear him at all. Now, if you don't know, when a train comes up to a grade crossing where the roads are, there's a series of whistles. Even the diesel horns do this now. It's 2 long blasts, a short blast, and another long blast. And that's the warning for the train crew to know that they're coming to a road crossing on the track. When a locomotive is about ready to pull out, before it moves, you'll give it, the conductor will give it a signal, or the brakeman, if it's going to move forward, kind of wave at it. And they give it 2 toots. They go toot toot, so they know, everybody around the track knows it's going to move forward. If you're giving it the reverse signal, and it's going to go backwards, tender first, it'll toot 3 times. So everybody around the track, for safety's sake, knows to expect, like, oh, it's coming, wait, it blasted 3 and I'm in the back, it's coming towards me. So you know that all around. So on the car tops, as the brakemen are going from car to car to car, the engine crew is working the whistle in different staccato kind of notes, like almost like a Morse code of its own, to tell them to either tighten the brake wheels or loosen the brake wheels, depending on what they need. So they have all these different codes, even to tell them to get up on the car roofs, because that's the reason you have a caboose on the end of a freight train. The conductor of a freight train, because even freight trains have conductors, and they don't punch tickets for anybody like passengers. But the conductor is the captain of the ship. He's the master of the train. The engine crew are responsible for running the locomotive. An engineman all the time will tell you how they're in charge. But in reality, the way it's looked at is the conductor is the captain of the ship. They used to call it captain. In the Civil War days, it wasn't called a conductor. It was the captain. So he's responsible for the safe movement of the train at all times. And the engine crew, imagine them like the guys in the boiler on a steamship, and they're in charge of keeping the fire going and everything else. So they're all back in the caboose. There's 2 or 3 brakemen, depending how long the train is, and they have assigned portions of the train that they have to get their station. Right? So they blow the special code, time to get up on the car roof, so they climb up the ladders, they walk up a number of cars. If I've got the first 5 cars, I got to walk all the way up to my set of cars, and that's my responsibility on the car tops, and my partner has the next set. And the conductor's in the caboose, usually out on the platform, kind of watching what's going on, helping the engine crew know like if everything's like, because he can use his lantern to tell them, by putting it out to the side, to tell them to slow down. Like if he thinks it's not safe, they have to be watching back to him. This is before radios. And as the Pennsy had train phones, they had these phones that worked. They had antennas on the caboose or the cabin car, and they had a train phone radar on the back of the tender, that they could call up to the engine, say, hey, slow down, there's problems, or whatever they had to do. But before that, in the daytime, you're wearing whitish gloves, because they don't stay white once you start handling couplers and everything else, you can see. So if you're not using those, at night you're using your lantern to give all those signals to help your hand. Now, the conductor is unaware in this story that these brakemen aren't trained. That's his responsibility, because if you start asking, well, who's responsible then? Because before the train leaves, the conductor should have a huddle with everybody and go over things. But the way this was explained, that's not quite the case. And here we are on the car tops. Bill's yelling out to these two men to pay attention to him, because he's not sure what they're even doing. And because they're new, the weather conditions and everything else, they're not reacting, they're not hearing him. And snow now has drifted deeply over the rails and caused the lead of these three engines to stop abruptly, going down the line, nearly knocking all the men off the car tops from the jolt. So you talk about moving, right, and then not moving. They were halfway down the mountain at this point, and the new men began releasing brake wheels to allow the train to start again, because it stopped. Oh, open up the brakes, and that wasn't what they should have done. They should have let the engine, because the brakes were set at a certain point. The caliper was against the wheel, keeping it like your bike brakes were on either side. But these guys just thought we should open up the brakes at this point, all the way. So what's going to happen with that, right? They had all but 5 of the 12 cars open, causing the train to take off like a shot on these icy rails on top of all of them. And they're all on the car tops. From the lead engine came the familiar series of whistle toots that were calling the brakemen now to tighten the brakes, to keep the downward slide under control. That's a disheartening feeling. All of that weight, you're at the head end in that locomotive. Bill needed these new men to go to their duties, but they were flat on the car roofs at this point, just hugging that catwalk. And they were terrified of the train now being out of control. So Bill worked frantically as fast as he could on the rocking car tops with the train picking up speed. And he's going from one car to the next on his own because he's got the presence of mind to do all that. As he looked ahead to the engine and then looked back at the conductor and the caboose, he saw that all of them had jumped to avoid going over the side of a mountain that's coming on an upcoming curve. After getting up from their jumps, they all stood up in the snow along the track and they watched. And it was the last they saw of the train, with one lone brakeman atop a boxcar holding the brake wheel before the whole train disappeared, plunging down a rocky gorge. The next day, after the storm had passed, 3 bodies were found in the wreckage. Not one whole body could be put together, and the heads were so broken that no faces could be identified. The conductor was sure they were his crew, including extra brakeman Bill Rogers. No new man signed on for Bill's job as the swingman, which is what that extra brakeman was called. So for the next few days that winter, crews had to make do without the 3rd brakeman up and down Ratton Mountain. Now, within a month's time, though, on a clear moonlit night, a train heading the opposite direction back to Colorado crested the summit, and folks there say they saw a shadowy figure climb the side of a boxcar as they rolled slowly past this old shanty. The brakemen were already on the car tops, but they never noticed the new helper. The conductor said he saw it from the caboose, but had no idea who it was. The extra hand was welcome because the train was moving too fast down the mountain with only 2 men, and the only notice was that the new man moved with sure footsteps and swiftly went to work. Air brakes had been added to cars and the engine since this big wreck, but on this steep grade, the brakeman would be critical to safely coming down the mountain. So they still couldn't trust the air brakes at that point. They weren't as finessed as they are now, so the extra safety of having the manual brakes from these men was required. As they came to the bottom of the grade, the swingman climbed down and stepped off the car to the ground with not even a wave of his hand. At the next stop, the conductor rounded up his crew and he asked him about the 3rd man helping them. They had no idea who he was, assuming it was the new swingman. The conductor let them know the railroad had not yet hired a new man, but they all had seen somebody working the brake wheels bright and clear in the moonlight. The conductor said, "Well, we owe him our lives for having been up there," and one of the brakemen answered, "I'll tell you this then, if it wasn't a man, it's either an angel or a ghost." And that went on for some time, night after night. Even if the trains weren't slowing down, a brakeman would appear in the middle of the train, tending the brake wheels and helping keep the train safely rolling. As soon as their descent would be complete, he'd vanish. The tale began to spread all across the Santa Fe Railroad, this phantom brakeman at Raton Pass. Old Uncle Dick set off, and he believed it was his friend Bill Rogers. And he said Bill was the sort of man who would always do the right thing any way he could. On a night some weeks later, a hobo was found on the cars as the train reached the summit, and he was booted off by the conductor. As this hobo was walking away from the train, he grabbed at one of the air hose levers on the car, the angle cock as it's called, this lever that's above the knuckle, and that will allow air to flow through them or to stop it. When you cut a car loose, the first thing you have to do is close off the air so there's no more flowing between the hoses from car to car. And then when the locomotive pulls the train, the knuckle opens and then there's a pop for the air that was trapped between the two hoses. And that will, you definitely have to close the one off on the car you're with also, because you lose all your air pressure if you don't. Something you learn in brakeman training if you don't do that. Because you're like, okay, go ahead. And the instructor knows, and the instructor's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Because he already knows, and you're going to learn quickly. Because as soon as it lets go, the whole train, we say it goes into emergency. And what that means is there's no air pressure, so it causes the clamps on the wheels to clamp down. And you're like, why did the train stop? Well, you didn't close the air hose. Oh, so you got to make sure you have all these. Unless you want the car to sit there, like the car that's going to get off, you don't have to close the air on that because you want it to stay anyway. So you set the wheel, you set the safety brake, the handbrake, and then when it releases the air, it locks itself in. So this hobo monkeying around with couplers and everything else because he got kicked off the train, he let one of the angle cocks slightly open. He just grabbed at it and turned it. So it's going to start leaking air or blocking air, depending on your point of view. And they weren't aware of this. Now, he grabbed at one of the air hose levers, so I want to get back into the story then, and he would affect the new brake system now and disable it. That was his intention from what he did. The crew expected these new brakes to do the job because that's how they've been trained up and they're working now, and they were unaware that they had lost that option due to what this guy had done. So when the engine crew realized they had no pressure, because there's a little dial in the engine that tells you your air pressure and all, they tooted the whistle to summon the brakemen to the car tops. That's why you have them. By the time they were in place, nothing they could do would regain control of the train rolling downhill faster and faster. They all made the decision to jump, and as they did, they all noticed one lone figure at this point turning brake wheels as he went from car to car. They watched him work methodically, even as the train began leaving the track on a curve not designed for the speed the train had reached, and engines, cars, and that brakeman all went over the side into a ravine in a great wreck. When that wreck was cleared, a brakeman's hat was found among the smashed up cars with some red hair still attached. The boot and the brakeman's brake bat were also found. You know what a brake bat is? It's this stick about half the length of a baseball bat, and because the brake wheel has spokes in it, it's a cast iron wheel, you put your brake bat in between those spokes and it gives you more leverage when you're trying to turn your brake wheel. So brakemen carry those in the steam era. Obviously you won't need them now. So if you know anybody who has one, I'm looking for one. Because I just want to have one. But now, a boot and the brake bat were found, but to this day, nobody is sure if the phantom brakeman was really Bill or a ghost with red hair just like his. Now, the final story in my narrative for you is the woman in white on the bridge. And this may be something that sounds most familiar to people when they talk about railroad ghosts and things like that. There is a railroad bridge crossing the Ambraw River, which is spelled, when you read it, it looks like it's Embarrass, but they pronounce it Ambraw. It's about 10 miles west of Vincennes, Indiana, just to the east of the storage tank farm of the old Texaco refinery on the outskirts of the small town of Lawrenceville, Illinois. The tracks cut between the refinery's tank farm and catalytic cracking machinery, which need water for cooling, so locating them near a river or a sizable stream was a must. On the north side of the tracks is a small shack for the freight office of the railroad. And the railroad I'm speaking of is the Baltimore and Ohio. And now it's part of the CSX transportation system. But in those days, it was one of the best known Class 1 railroads in the country. And as one of the country's first railroads, actually it was the first railroad, it had a lot of history in its own unique character, from the locomotives and cabooses it built in its own shops to its home-built special-purpose freight cars to its beautiful and elegant passenger service units. Their most famous named trains the most famous is the Royal Blue. And they streamlined the locomotive that pulled it where it looked like a bullet. And if you look for models of that, you can find American Flyer in the 1950s made a model of that train. And it was painted this beautiful royal blue. And that was the most famous train of the Baltimore and Ohio. But that's not the train we're going to talk about now, but that just gives you an idea about their prestige. The B&O is considered a class act in American railroad and a rival of the Pennsy. And often, it had its own peculiar way of doing things, as all great railroads do. Sometimes, the man who shared this story, he wrote, "Sometimes I'd ride one of those B&O passenger trains across that bridge that I mentioned by that catalytic cracking tank farm. It would take me to dinner at my grandmother's house, but I never thought there was anything special about that train then. Every once in a while, I had an uncle who would ask me if I'd seen anything by that bridge, but I never noticed anything unusual about it. He always made me wonder, but I was only 10 years old and I didn't know that there was anything there except the pumping station for the coolant water for the refinery. A few years later, I heard the first mumbles about some kind of a ghost story. It was something about a girl in a white dress, but that's a pretty common theme for ghost stories. For some reason, you didn't hear the kids whose dads worked for the railroad talk about it, though. By the time I was in high school, we had moved to the next town down the line from Lawrenceville called Bridgeport, and that was where I heard a little bit more about the story of the girl on the bridge. She was said to be about our age, high school, or maybe just a little bit older. The story began with the girl in a very nice white dress, and that she walked the mile or so from the refinery in a tank car yard and out onto the bridge to wait for a train. When it came along, the engine crew saw her, and she saw them. As they saw her, they blew the whistle to warn her off the track and tried to slow down. But she made no attempt to jump or get out of the way, and she just stood there in her white dress, and she let the train hit her. The full train of cars moving at a respectable speed, track speed as we call it, takes quite a distance to stop, and there's no way these trainmen could keep from hitting her. At 40 or 50 miles an hour, there's not much left when a train hits a person like that, and it doesn't matter if it's a pretty girl or not. It was thought that she may have lost her boyfriend or her husband in the early days of the war, though I never heard exactly which war. I always assumed it was meant that it was the Second World War, but some said it was the big one. No one knows for sure. And since we had lost a family member during the attack on Pearl Harbor, I felt sort of a little closer to that poor girl I never knew who died before I was born. Later, I changed schools and graduated and went on to the Marine Corps. And when I came home to visit, I spent time with a girlfriend I had known from school. One night when I got to her home, just as she was heading out, she told me to come along to her brother's house. He worked for the railroad, and she thought I might like to meet him. When we got to his house, her sister-in-law told us that he had been crying, then laughing. Then he cried some more, and then he started getting very, very drunk. I'd seen a few drunks already in my short time in the Marines, and when they got to talking, they really had a lot more to say than you'd thought. And the best way to get them talking was to sit and listen. He would start talking about his railroad work, and then follow it with some laughing. And then he'd talk more about his work, and follow that with some crying. But after a short time of nervous laughs, I started to wonder if he had more to say than he was doing. So I asked him what else he had on his mind. He looked at me, and he gulped down more whiskey, and I noticed he was shaking like he was really cold. He'd seen her, he said, the girl on the bridge. He told me all about it. It seems that sometime since that first time, the train crew would see a girl standing out on the bridge right where the one that had been hit before would stand. It was no ghost either, as far as the train was concerned, because when they hit it, there was blood across one side of the engine in front of the fireman's side, which would be the left side. And as they went past, they could see the white dress go under the wheels. The first few times, these trains that would hit would stop there. The firemen would get down, and the head brakeman would come out, and they'd walk under the train shining their lights to see if they could find any remains. And when they'd get there, looking under the wheels of the cars, nothing's there. They were told it was probably some kind of a trick, stunt by some kids with a dummy and some white rags, and they'd shrug it off. That was the official explanation, anyway, of the B&O. And for a while at least, the trainmen were ordered not to stop at that bridge, even if they thought they had hit someone. It was always the trains that were coming from the same direction as the time that the girl had been hit, though, but it wasn't always the same locomotive or crew. I found out there were other people who knew about it, and I heard other railroaders talk about it after they'd retired and couldn't be laid off for mentioning it. It happened through the 1950s, I was told, when they first put radios in the cabs of the locomotives and in the cabooses so the crews could talk to each other and to the stations they passed. Sometimes the crew up front would hit the girl and see her go under the wheels, and they'd call on the radio back to the caboose so the crew in back would look for anything unusual as the train rolled over the bridge. The ones in back never found anything, not even once. The last guy I know of who worked for the railroad in that area told me he had spent nearly 20 years along that route, but he had never seen her. He'd heard the story, though, and he promised he'd let me know if he ever saw her. Many things have changed since the refinery was shut down or the railroad changed its name, but she doesn't come along anymore. Maybe whatever she thought was worth dying about doesn't mean much to anyone now, or maybe it's just been enough water to pass beneath that bridge and enough trains across it that she can finally get some rest for good at last. Or maybe the next train along that way, crossing that bridge when they come to it at about the same time as the one that hit that girl the first time, maybe the very next one will see that same girl in her white dress with that same look on her face. Nasty business when that happens. Stories you can tell from. So anybody relate to any of those in any way? Yeah?
Yeah, we have a lot of parallels to your stories.
Yeah.
We have a Big Shanty here, a town Big Shanty.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, and we have a story of a phantom brakeman on the back to Bordeaux and
No kidding.
No,
Love it.
and I can send it to you if you give me an email.
Yeah, sure. I'll pass
And
it.
General Grant was also here.
Oh, I know that.
Visiting
I get told that every time I go. Even when I'm trying to be General Grant and not President Grant. You went fishing. Like, no, I'm still a general. So yeah.
And the other, you had mentioned you had some time with the East Broad Top.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the Orbissonia?
Oh, yeah.
That was formerly the business arm of BB&J.
Yep.
That had the phantom brakeman.
3-foot narrow gauge.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he could still be on that car down there. Because that's residual energy, and that's some of the other stories I have for you from the museum, too. Somebody at Lynn Modiger at the Broad Top, we were talking one time about things, and he pointed at the Orbissonia, he goes, it's haunted. I said, so I've heard. And he winked.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Big Shanty in Georgia was the station stop where the general stopped for breakfast. Because I have a whole program about that whole episode. But they stopped, they had a conductor, 26-year-old conductor, calls out, 20 minutes for breakfast. And everybody got off, because it was a 5-car train, 3 boxcars and 2 coaches. They were taking empties up to Chattanooga to load up military gear to evacuate ahead of General Mitchell's division attacking Chattanooga. So Andrews Raiders all sat in the cars and they waited, and the station was called Big Shanty. Now, if you look it up, if you Google Big Shanty, Georgia, it tells you it's Kennesaw. They won't call it Big Shanty anymore.
Ours was railroad name. The Erie had a Big Shanty.
Right, because that's what I was going to get to. They called it that because they had a big shanty.
And there was also a station there besides.
All right, very nice. I know for when Greg came through, Susie, I think you sent me the article about it. He didn't get off the car. And because he was in the parlor car at the back with the Mucky Mucks, who were in this really, really nice car, this lounge car. And if I remember right from the story, a crowd gathered because they wanted to see him. Like, do we see the president? So he came out on the back platform and just said, hello, everyone, I'm just visiting and passing through. And he started to get into some kind of thing he was talking about. And boop, boop, you heard the whistle up front and the train had to start going. Well, sorry, got to go.
I think it was at our kids' revival.
It was at the Viaduct.
Yeah. Because we have to do that still. Yes.
You wanted to do something.
We have to go out when I'm...
He leans over and says, how far?
Right, and I have to be dressed as
How high
president, and we
are you?
do that. My goodness, we're up pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the suit. I have to do it in the suit. There's no other way to do it. Because I'll actually be reenacting something at that point. Yeah. So, my friends at the museum that do the restoration work, all the locomotives in that museum, and if you know museum work, anything that's owned by the museum, you can't change it. You can't rebuild it. You are altering the historical integrity of the artifact. So what do you do with steam locomotives? The Pennsylvania Railroad took they didn't do it with every single type of locomotive, but they took the majority of their most popular designs, you know, for the size of the number of wheels under each locomotive. Like one that has 4 and 4, like this one has 8 wheels under it. They saved one of those, and that actually ran at Strasburg. It was in the movie Hello, Dolly in the 1960s, number 1223, which is my favorite engine in the world, and she's at the museum. But they preserve all, and the big one that the model is in here, they have one of those. In fact, the one here is numbered for the one that's at the museum. So Pennsy wanted to save all these things into eventually go into this big museum. And they were all stored at Northumberland. And a number of cars were kept there as well. So all these steam locomotives and all these passenger cars and a few different types of specialty freight cars that the railroad had built themselves for this eventual Pennsylvania Railroad Museum. The Pennsy went bankrupt about 69 and they merged with the New York Central. Sorry about that. That's like being a Yankees fan and having to talk about the Red Sox. It's the same thing, because the Pennsy and the New York Central were huge rivals, but they merged. They were forced into this merger. And now Pennsy didn't know what to do with the equipment because the New York Central people were like, well, we should just get rid of it, just scrap it. We're running diesels now, because we scrapped all of ours, and they were horrified, like, no. So they managed to stall destruction of all these things. And at the same time, the Strasburg was building their tourist railroad in Lancaster County. And eventually the state of Pennsylvania decided they were going to create a state railroad museum, so they built it across from the track at the Strasburg Railroad. They found this really nice open field, and they have a massive hall, and they just broke ground on an engine house that has a turntable out in the backyard of where they're going to have all these different locomotives. So they brought the Pennsy collection down for Northumberland, and there's some of the coolest pictures that you could find of all these locomotives with a freight car in between each of them to help with the braking. And they were pulled by diesels of the Penn Central down to Strasburg, and at the interchange off the main line, number 90, Strasburg Railroad locomotive, brought all those other steam engines in. There's some really cool pictures of it. And then for years, they were all stored on track at the station in Strasburg. And they have signs on them saying no climbing. Of course, we'd go 3 times a year as kids, and we're always taking pictures climbing on all this equipment. Yeah, but for years and years, until they built a museum, that was all there. So I mentioned all that as setup, because like the Orbisonian, and man, you couldn't have set me up better by bringing that up. Railroad cars and all the people that are on and off them. You think about all that energy, you know, emotions. People are riding trains for all manner, every conceivable emotion. You know, you're riding to a happy event, or I could talk about railroad wrecks. I have this book about this thick of railroad wrecks in Pennsylvania, and a number of them at the turn of the century, due to bad brakes and bad signaling, were excursions where people were going out of town, a reunion, a family reunion, going out of town to a grove to have a picnic, and the train coming back would wreck. So every type of emotion is on all these types of different cars that are on trains. And I don't think about it when I go in the museum, because I refer to it as the museum. I mean, it's my favorite railroad, and I'm a train guy, and if I have to go to any one museum, that's it. That's the museum. And I have an event in November I'll be going to there anyway. So I go and I just delight in the whole of the Pennsylvania collection. Just love it. But my friends in the restoration shop, they have allowed me to come back into the restoration area and watch what they do. So I'm watching them fabricate new domes for the top of the boiler, or they're fabricating different parts of the machinery to cosmetically restore all these locomotives that the railroad preserved. And they're never going to run again. And that's why I said about you can't alter the artifacts, because so many people see all these trains in the museum, but you should run them. No, you can't, because they're museum pieces. And sadly, the way the Pennsy beat up their engines, they're never going to run again anyway, unless they would be rebuilt, because the fireboxes were just torn up inside, where you have the constant contraction and expansion from the heating and everything else. So Pennsy knew when they were getting rid of steam, well, we're getting diesels, so just run these things until they break. You know, the K4 Pacific, a 462 locomotive, they built 475 of them to pull passenger trains. And in the last 5 years of service, because they stopped steam engines in 1957, so in that early part of the 50s, these 475 engines that were pulling passenger trains, as they would break down, they would just put it off on a sidetrack and pull another one up, because they're not going to need to replace them with another steam engine, because we got diesels coming, so we'll just run these until they break and put them away. How nice, right? Because there are railroads that don't have 400 engines at all. And here's this railroad, in every one of their classes, they have 300 to 400 of just that one type of engine, right? but we managed to preserve one. Of that design, there's one at Horseshoe Curve that's being restored to run because it's not owned by that museum. And then there's one more that's in the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. So 2 of that type survived. Now, I go see my friends, and I get to know them pretty well as far as they trust me around them because they won't let me take pictures when they're restoring. Right? You can take pictures, but don't you dare post it anywhere. So I get to know the museum curator, and I'm on my way to go do a general grant talk, and I'll stop in to see them because I got like 4 or 5 hours before I have to go past Strasburg. So I ride the train, and I'm in my uniform. And then I got 2 more hours to kill. So I go see my friends in the shop, and I meet the curator, and he notes what I'm wearing, and he appreciates I'm into history and everything, and I talk his ear off about all these trains. And I say, I'd really love to get photographs with them sometime. Can I do that? And they allow that. You know, different groups, you can just get permission. You know, have to formally ask them for permission, say what you want to do, and they'll set up a date for you, and they'll escort you through with a guide, and they don't charge you for it at the State Museum, which is nice. So in this annual wall calendar that I put out, I put a different theme on it every year, and I'll get to that at the end. But one year my theme was horses, iron, and flesh. So General Grant posing with horses, of course, and then with steam engines. Like the one that looks like this, I got to pose on a horse with that, which was like a full way to go. But I go into the museum in Strasburg, I have my permission, and I got it all laid out with locomotives and everything I want to go pose with. And my friends from the shop are there to escort me around. They took me by the most Civil War-like of the engines in there. They don't have any engines from the Civil War. The closest one was built in 1870 by the Baldwin Company in Philadelphia, and she's called the Tahoe. And when they do this military timeline trains and troops event in November, that's where I set my General Grant headquarters, right next to her on the track. And I went by there first to pose with her, and pulled the little stanchions away, and I was on the step. I got to get on them, get in the cab or whatever. Behind her is a Civil War era passenger car from the Cumberland Railroad running through Pennsylvania. And the car itself was a regular passenger car, but it was converted to a second-class smoking car. And that's relevant now, because as we're looking at where I'm going to pose next, these guys are telling me all about that. And Al, the older of the 2, starts to laugh because we should tell him about the woman. I was like, what woman? We had a medium in the museum last week. Oh, yeah? She came in, she got permission to, do her little ghost search kind of thing. And she was walking by the Tahoe, because the Tahoe's here, and there's a coach next to it, and it's this passage area next to it. So they were walking from the front towards the back, and they got by the cab, and she stopped. She put her one hand on her hip, and she looked up at the cab, and she said, "I beg your pardon, that's quite rude." And the 2 guys stopped like, "That's funny. Come on, we'll show you." She goes, No. This man up here, what's your name, sir? And she said, "Bruce, thank you." And they were looking at her like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "That man up there said he likes to watch the ladies when they go by, especially from behind." And she was like, "Huh?" And they looked at her like, "Yeah, okay." And his name's Bruce, huh? Sure, okay. They were kind of humoring her. They got to this next car, and she stopped, and she started doing this. And I see that all the time when I'm smoking cigars, so I knew what was going on. Because even before they smell it, they have this thing in mind that it's going to stink. But she smelled cigar smoke. And they were telling me this. I was like, I haven't been here, and I wouldn't be smoking in the museum. I'd get kicked out for that. But she stopped, and she goes, "I'm smelling cigar smoke." And they looked at her and said, "Well, yeah, just, it's a smoking car." She goes, "I don't know anything about it. I don't know trains." She had no idea what these cars were for. But it had been converted as a second-class passenger smoking car. So it has a compartment halfway through where you have the bench seating, and in the back end is a baggage compartment with this side platform that the men would go out on that platform and have their cigars in the 1800s. She said there were 2 men standing there on the platform in long coats like Lincoln wears, with tall hats like Lincoln wears, big fluffy cravats. And she said one had a magnificent colored vest that he was wearing, which is Victorian. And she said they were both puffing on cigars, and they looked down at her and kind of laughed. And she was telling the museum guys what she saw, and they're just thinking, "Oh, okay." And they took him down. They took her down further down the line, and they said, "Well, we have a string of cars behind 1223 now." My favorite engine. She's got 5 coaches behind her. Actually, a baggage car and a parlor car and a couple coaches. And in the parlor car is a woman's salon. So if the women on the train wanted to get away from the men, going to the salon, and off you could go to hang out, get away from the men. And it's about as big as this little area. You think about a train car being that wide. There's benches on two sides of it, and it has windows, and paneling on this side that has the passageway outside of the room. So they went to see things there. Now they told me all this as we were walking to that car for me. And I said, oh, let's get a picture in the salon. That'll be great. And they're like, no, it's actually the women's salon. So, well, let me see it anyway. And they looked at each other and laughed. They were like, yeah, okay, great. So they took me in there. My Marine buddy, figures, right? They took me in. I sat down. My photographer's getting pictures of me. I'm sitting looking out the window like I'm patiently waiting for the train to leave. I'm sitting with this really nice paneling all around me. And I started to sweat. You made a joke about wearing wool. I'm used to wearing it. You know, I wear it all the time in my work, 23 days a month, right? 2 layers of wool. I don't sweat that often. I look forward to that in February, but in July I'm not looking forward to it when I actually do sweat. But I'm in this train car, and I just feel like I'm sitting in the sun in July. And they're looking at me like, "You okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just a little sweaty. I don't know why. It's not stifling in here." And they elbowed each other. They said, "Yeah, we should tell her." "Tell me what?" They said, "Come on out." And we got out of the car, and they said, "You were in the women's salon. They probably didn't like you being in there." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, right, like you guys." And they said, "No, the medium was talking to the women in there when she was here. So you in there, they were probably yelling at you, and you couldn't hear them, and they may be swatting at you to get, this is the women's area, get out, take your scar with you, you know, kind of thing." That was their supposition on it because of what she had told them. But she didn't know ahead of time that it was the salon. She just was actively
You
telling
got
them.
off light then.
I know, right? Yeah, nobody pulled my hair or anything like that. The flyer, is it still intact?
Yes.
Okay, cool. The locomotive on the flyer is also in the museum, number 1187, and she's placed over a pit where you can walk underneath and look up at all the wheels and everything else under her. My two buddies, Al and Steve, they were doing something inside the cab. So they were inside where the firemen and the enginemen would go. And they put a GoPro camera on the back head of the firebox. Like, think of like your mantle on a fireplace. They put a GoPro up to kind of record what they were doing because they were going to post it on the, hey, look what we're doing at your museum kind of video. And they were putting a gauge on. I think they were putting another gauge on that they had restored. And you see them puttering around. And I'm watching it. They took me back to the shop. And they have this massive screen about as big as that they put blueprints on when they want to get details on things. So they were running this video on that big screen. And they're like, go ahead, look at it. Get up real close. And don't look away. And I'm watching them like, okay, you're putting a gauge on. Okay, great. And it's from the view looking through the cab over the tender, okay? That's behind the locomotive. So the camera's facing back through that way. And that's why I put this one on the flyer. I'm watching, I'm like, okay, putting the gauge on. Okay, great. And like, just keep watching. And all of a sudden, what I saw behind them, outside of the cab, was this. Walking just like I walked. Doing everything I just did. Dressed kind of like what I'm dressed like now. In full color, behind them. And I'm watching that like, oh yeah, do that again. He looks good. Because I'm thinking historical something or other, right? And it's like, yeah, well, we were closed. There was nobody here. We did that. We did that the day the museum was closed. Like, well, what was he doing up there? Was he filming like what? No, there was nobody there. They're trying to tell me. I'm like, run that again. And I watched it like three, four more times. And it was a fireman who was going across the tender to open the hatch and pull the chain and bring the spigot down from the water tower to put water in the tender. Yeah, and the way he was walking, that's the way you walk because you got obstructions and different things that are up there. You got to be careful and you're stepping over and everything he did. And I'm like, did you show anybody this? And they're like, no. I'm not showing anybody this. So I'm the only. I said, I'm going to tell people about it. And they're like, you can tell them all you want. We have the video. So no name of anybody, but when I go in now for my weekend, when I'm there for Trains and Troops, I leave a cigar on my little camp desk because I set up like my headquarters is right next to the track. So I have my camp desk and my letter writing, and I have letter to Lincoln, a letter to Sherman. I leave stuff out, and I have a map table, all this stuff I set up. But I leave a cigar on my desk, and I look at Tahoe, and I say, Bruce, you're welcome to have a cigar. And then I walk past the smoking car on my way out, and I leave a cigar on the platform. I say, Jens, this one's for you, and then I leave. Nothing's been moved. Every year when I come back in the morning on Sunday, I'm like, I want to see. And nothing's been moved yet. Because if something's moved, because if something's moved, I'm going to go into the director's office and say, please, let's see your security footage. I want to see what happened, on that point. Steve told me one of the long 1940s era steel Pullmans, like the Bud Company or Pullman makes those really, really long dining cars. They had one in the yard that they were gutting, steel doors on either end. And he said he'd walked through the whole car to do something where he had left the back door open and walked all the way through. And when he got to the other end to open the door, that door on the other end slammed shut. And he turned around and looked, and he went back because he wanted it open to get air through the car. So he went back and he opened it again, and he said he was playing with it because we're troubleshooting together. Like, what, did you bump it? Was it rocking? No, it's just sitting on a track. The brakes are set. It's not going to go anywhere. And he goes, I jumped up and down and nothing happened. But when he walked back to the other end of the car, it slammed again. He just left it. He's like, whatever. And he goes, I'm just trying to work here. He just said it out to everybody. I had a fellow conductor there who he would come up from Virginia to stay overnight. And he worked. All of us working in Strasburg, everybody's part-time. Nobody works 5 days a week there. But I got to do a lot of subbing where it felt like I was working 5 days a week a lot of times. So I had a lot of good experience with hours and everything, handling brakes and hoses and whatnot. But my one friend from Virginia would come up, and he would work a weekend every month. And he got tired of having to pay for a hotel overnight. So he got permission from the railroad to stay in one of the cabooses that's used on the property. And it just happened that weekend it was on the end of one of the trains, and that train was lined up at the station so that in the morning the locomotive would come out and pull the train away. So it's on the train, and it's lined up with all the cars, all the passenger cars. He got all his bed stuff, bedding down for the night, 9, 10 o'clock at night. He locks the doors on either end of the caboose. He gets up in the bunk part of it. That's one reason the Pennsy calls their cabooses cabin cars, because it's like a cabin you stay in when you're away like that overnight. So cabooses have bunk beds. He's all nestled in. He said maybe 2 in the morning he felt like he had to get up to go use the room, and he heard a door slam. And his first thought was somebody's monkeying around at the station, because Strasburg doesn't have fences around the whole place. And how they've not had problems, it's been, knock on wood, that people respect that place. But he looked through the cars, because he said that to his mind it sounded like one of the coach doors. So he gets his light, he can see all the way through the train to the very last car, because he's looking through all the windows, and he says everything's closed. He can see by the reflection. And to make sure, he got his conductor key and walked through all the cars, making sure everything was locked, went back. He said he heard it slam a second time. And at that point he said, I just went back to sleep. I didn't know what was going on. Most of the cars at Strasburg are, the oldest one is from 1889, I think, as we would say in our narration about asking people to be nice to the equipment. They have one car that's before the turn of the century that's still used in service, and the rest of them are early 1900s, and most of them came from the New Haven Railroad in Connecticut that they use. Now, I don't know what that would matter as far as emotions and everything else, but what I said earlier about all the different reasons people travel by train and all those different emotions that are embedded in some of that equipment, is it any wonder you would have a medium come through a museum and have such pinpoint ways to describe things without knowing what she's even talking about with trains? But and these guys are like, oh, you know this. It's like, no, I don't know this. I'm just telling you what the people in the car are telling me, kind of thing. So,
do you ever go back and see if there was ever a guy named Bruce? They have records?
They have been looking.
Yeah.
The locomotive ran on the Virginia and Truckee. So they said they've gone through, and somebody said there was a Bruce, but they weren't sure. So we talk about it every year when I go, because they're like, you're going to say hi to Bruce? Yeah, I'm going to leave him a cigar, because he's up there looking at the ladies as they go by all the time. There have been other people that have since said to them, yeah, talk to Bruce, because there will be museum volunteers on some of the equipment. You walk past one of the diesels, and a guy that worked on that diesel when she was running for Conrail. He's the guy, yeah, this is my diesel. I used to do this and this and this. And then you go to another car, yep, we shovel coal in here. And you go to the Tahoe, and there's Bruce, like, turn around and see, or whatever he's saying to people. But somebody actually came to them and said, yeah, we talked to Bruce. And they got chills over it, like, no way, really? This is somebody else now. Along the way, you never know. Now, as far as all of that goes, I say all the time to people who are unsure of it or doubt, I say you're a skeptic until you're not. I live in Gettysburg. And everybody thinks about ghosts in Gettysburg and everything else. I've seen some things, and I saw things as a kid. My brother and I saw the same thing together one time. That we have no doubt about it. And I say in Gettysburg, I say that if you see anything, it's because that spirit either doesn't care that you see them or they want you to see them. So all those tours that go around, that they're going to take you around and show, that's nice, but spirits aren't on their dime. They're not going to show
I
up.
have a Gettysburg story, but it's not real.
Right, that's okay, because that's what I wanted to get to, like other ghost stories, if you want to share about that.
Devil's Den.
Yeah.
Friend and I were there, and I was driving, I pulled in, parked, and we saw who we thought was a reenactor.
Right.
Young fella. But, reenactors, normally their uniforms are tattered and stuff. This fella is...
Well, we try.
But this was real, and he was young, and he was thin, and he was gaunt, and he was
Yeah.
tattered and everything. And of course, I waved everybody. I bring my jacket, and I looked away, and my friend, and we looked away, and we looked back, and it was gone.
Gone.
And I mean,
Yep.
if you know between Little Round Top and Devil's Den, it's all...
Yeah, there's nowhere you can
it's
run.
all open.
Yeah.
And she knew better than I. We didn't say anything at first, and then later on in the hotel room, we started talking, and she said, he had a butternut uniform,
Yeah.
which was
And that's Devil's Den.
the right for Devil's Den
Yep.
and stuff.
Yep.
And I saw his rifle. She said he had a dog. Now I was driving; she was passenger side, and he was on the passenger side. So,
Interesting. Dog.
but she has gone to other places. Like she and her husband went to Andersonville, and she started to tell that story. And he said, "Oh, we've heard that story before from Devil's Den."
There's another one related to that, because you have where Devil's Den. Well, you have Little Round Top, and if you're looking west down the slope of Little Round Top across to Devil's Den, they look like dinosaur heads. One looks like a T-Rex head. They're all these big, massive rocks, and their glaciers had moved them there way back. And it's named Devil's Den for a black snake that popped up and scared local boys, and they called the snake the devil. But from Devil's Den, further south is they refer to it as the triangle for where it is in the field. There's an old man who sits in the triangle on a rock. He's got gray trousers on. He doesn't have a jacket. You can see his suspenders, and he's got his sleeves rolled up. And he's usually sitting on that rock, and sometimes he has a musket, sometimes he doesn't. But he talks to people and tells them to be careful where they're walking.
Now I've gone that triangular field.
Yeah.
I've not seen him, but one time I was walking there, and as I walked on the road, and I maybe 10 feet, and I looked back, and a great big branch fell right down.
Wow.
Right down where I was
That's
standing.
creepy when something like that happens.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you don't know.
No.
But the Devil's Den soldier.
Well, I got two reenactor buddies. One of them was a good friend of mine, Army vet, who portrays General Meade, and he invited me to be in his generals group called the Federal Generals Corps to be there at Grant, because we were all lookalikes for the top generals. But he was acting as a first sergeant for a reenactor company that was doing living history at the Pennsylvania Monument, which is almost a mile from where they had this encounter, across from Devil's Den, or rather across from Little Round Top, and north of Devil's Den, where there's a slope, and there's some monuments there that are part of regular Army units that were there. And then behind them, there was a Delaware unit. Now, the reenactor group my friend Joe was with, they were Delaware reenactors. So when they were done with their demonstration before sunset, they said, let's go down by Little Round Top to the Delaware marker, and we'll lay a wreath, or we'll do a little tribute. Their wives had had enough at that point. They were up on Little Round Top, sitting on one of the little benches up on there, looking down the valley, and they saw their husbands in their blue suits, and they said they saw a third man come out of the woods in a tattered uniform. First thing we do when we see somebody in a really good kit, hey, that's a great kit. We give each other that compliment, we really try not to make a correction if somebody's wearing sneakers. We'll be like, what are you doing? You know, we won't really get harsh, but if it's a really good impression, we're like, hey man, that looks great. And they said that to this guy. They said, wow, you look really good. You look beat up. And they said he didn't react to it. He didn't say thank you. He kind of looked like, what is that? You know, and he looked nervous. He was fidgety. He kept looking over his shoulder. And he addressed my friend Joe. He said, First Sergeant, we need your help. Can you come with us? And they're like, what, somebody hurt? Well, we don't have our first sergeant. We need you. And he was obtuse with it. They're like, what are you talking about? Are you thirsty? You want water? Come back to our camp. We'll give you dinner. Because they thought he was another reenactor doing something, from what they said. And their wives were up on the bench, and they were watching this whole thing. And they saw them talking to this man who was waving his arms. And they were like, well, come with us. And he turned and went back towards the woods. And they heard him shuffling into the woods as they were walking away, and then they heard nothing. And they were like, wait a minute. And they turned around. And I'm looking at my friend Joe. I'm like, come on, man. You're pulling my leg. He goes, Ken, I'm telling you, man. I talked to this guy. And that's when he told me the wives, when we got back to camp, said, who were you talking to? And they said, did you see him? And they said, yeah, he was wearing a blue and he was waving his arms. And he turned around, you turned around, and we stopped looking. And they said, well, he disappeared. They didn't hear him walking anymore in the bushes. He just vanished.
It's like I was there one time, and I don't remember if it was Peach Orchard or somewhere, and I was there by myself.
Oh, good. Hold that Peach Orchard thing, because I got one for you.
I heard a rebel. I heard what I thought was a rebel yell.
Yeah.
And I'm looking around, and there's I'm thinking kids.
Right.
You know,
oh, sure.
John Canyons and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
right. Nothing
There
there.
was nobody there. I never told that to anybody. I told my Devil's Den one, but the rebel yell one.
Yes, sir.
Wait,
Nothing.
Yeah.
well, it's nothing other than we also have a devil's den.
Do you have a Baltimore Street?
Yeah, bucktails.
Yeah, bucktails, yeah.
We got a Custer City.
Oh, that's right. I came through Custer City.
Yeah.
Grant was not a fan of Custer. That's a story for another day. The first month we were back from California, we were living in an apartment a block from where we live now on Baltimore Street. It was July. It was late July, so it was 2 weeks after the reenactment had gone on. And our dog Maddie, we're teaching her the route we would walk, and we would go the block around our house to walk her. And because our yard was owned by the landlord who had tours come in, so I couldn't let her use the yard. So I had to walk her. So off we go. This was a time, it was 2014, so Obama was still president, and he was having something done at Camp David to excavate ground. I don't know what they were putting in, but it was something Obama wanted done at Camp David. And there's dump trucks were coming through town all day and all night. And it was like a local story, like, what's with all the dump trucks? Is there a dump truck festival? It's like, no, there's work being done at Camp David. Obama wanted something, so they're extracting all this dirt and they're hauling it through Gettysburg. Because Camp David is like 10 miles south of Gettysburg. As a crow flies. If we were allowed to, we could fly over it, but you don't want to do that. But it's right there. And our house was right up next to the street. Like the bedroom looked down on the sidewalk, and then you got dump trucks going right by. So Maddie and I are walking up the street. We make the turn to Breckenridge Street and start going around the block. And I heard this, whoo! And it's like the back of a dump truck, that back flap that's on the dumper part. Because you hear that. They come down this hill. They come down the hill on Baltimore Street, and when they get to the level point, if there's nothing in there, that thing will slam. And it's just annoying hearing these things all the time. And I turned around like, what is it with these trucks? And there was nothing there. Nothing was on the street. And I'm looking like, well, that's weird. There's no way he would have turned off because you would have heard the brakes and everything else on these trucks. Especially the Mack diesels. They do this sound as they're downshifted through. So it's very distinctive. None of that. Just that crack, that boom. And we got around the back corner. We came through the alley and we're turning to go back down alongside where the Farnsworth house is on Baltimore Street to turn around and come home. And it hit me. I'm like, wait a minute. The reenactment just happened. It's 12 at night. It's 12:10 a.m. It's not going to be reenactors with a cannon out there. But maybe something that the reenactors were doing, because they say that when we walk around in our attire, we stir things. Maybe because all those reenactors were there, and this was 2014, there were quite a few that came in that summer, that maybe something got stirred up and I just heard a residual cannon. Because where we are on that part of Baltimore Street, looks onto the north slope of Cemetery Hill, where the majority of the Army of the Potomac had their cannon anyway. And it came from that direction. So I was just putting that together, and I got in the house, and my wife was already asleep, and I kicked her. I said, I just heard a cannon. And she's like, that's nice. But the next morning, she wasn't paying attention. The next morning, we're having coffee. She goes, did you hear a cannon last night? I said, yeah, I think I did. And I told her all about it. She's not a believer. But, you know, she watches the shows with me and everything else. She's not had experience. She says ghosts don't like her. But, in fact, at the peach orchard, we had friends in from Jersey, and we're showing them around. And they were like, we want to see ghosts. I said, I'll take you down where I can tell you a story about ghosts. And I told them a story about my first sergeant friend and the guy that walked into the woods. So we were going down the road to get to that place on the field. And it was dusk. So it's just getting dark. It's in the summertime. So it's about 9 o'clock at night. And you're supposed to be off the field by sunset. So I wanted to hurry up and get them done and get out of there. Now we turn on the road that goes past the peach orchard and then the wheat field before it gets down to that road that goes to Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and that guy, where that guy was. So we're coming down the road, we get past the peach orchard, and the next field is where the wheat field was, and you got those rail fences there. You know, those fences that are up everywhere, right? My wife's playing with her phone, I'm driving, our friend's behind us, I'm watching to make sure they're following us down the road, and I'm looking ahead, I see a guy in a Civil War uniform, gray. Couldn't really tell for sure, but it looked gray in the little bit of light I had, climbing up that fence, and then he starts walking across the road right in front of where I'm driving. And I'm going 20 miles an hour through the park, just to make sure I'm not speeding, because they'll ticket you. They'll ticket you on Emmitsburg Road, even though that's a state road. But I slowed down, and didn't want to hit this guy, probably a reenactor going back to his camp. He wanted to go, you know, touch grass somewhere like we like to do. And in that moment, in that split-second moment of doing all that, my wife says to me, she looks up from her phone and goes, why'd you slow down? And I looked over, I'm like, he's the guy. Well, it was a guy. He should have been in the road. He still should have been walking across in that little, you know how you have those little moments where you're talking like that? It happened quicker than I could describe it to you. And I looked at him. He was just there. And she goes, huh? I said, you missed it. You were looking at your phone. He was right there. And the people behind us, when we parked, I said, did you see the guy? And they're like, no. I said, I braked. I said, yeah, we saw you brake. We thought you were waiting for us to catch up. I said, but I broke because the guy was walking through. You didn't see him? No.
Did you look on your grill?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was a kepi stuck on the grill. No, but that was one other night. My band plays in town quite a bit, and we would play 2 houses over from us is the Rupp House, and they have this big, massive, big, beautiful yard. Perfect, like reenactors come and they do camp things there. I set up my headquarters there, and my band will play there too. So we had the band play for the weekend, and my brother played French horn with my band. He'd come over from Jersey to play with us, and he stayed for the weekend. So Friday night we got all set up. He rolls in about midnight. He likes to have, you know, he likes to talk for about 2-3 hours after that. So we're up till 2 in the morning most times when he comes to visit. But I love him, and that's how it was. I wish I could have those again because he's gone now. But we're out back in my yard. He's having a cigarette, and we're looking over towards the Rupp yard. And I'm telling him, well, we'll put the canvas up tomorrow. We'll put the chairs out. And he's looking, and there was a porta-john behind the house for the reenactors to use, right? And he's looking over there, and Maddie, our dog, was there. She's now looking over there with him, and her tail went out straight. And they're both looking towards the Rupp yard, and because I was looking at my brother talking. I'm like, what are you looking at? And he goes, looking over there. And he's just doing this because he didn't want to move so much. And he's just holding a cigarette. He didn't even put it up. He's just, I'm looking over there. And I looked over. I said, what? He goes, guy came around the side of the porta-john in a uniform. I said, Cap, it's 12. It's 2 in the morning. Nobody's out running around in uniforms now. And he goes, no. He came out, put his hands on his hips, and looked right at me. I'm waiting for him to come out again. And he stood there for another 15, 20 minutes, but he saw it. And he came in the house. He goes, you believe me, right? Because we both saw our grandmother that had passed in the house we moved into. We saw her standing on the stairway coming down. We both saw her at the same time. Because we looked up, we saw this figure. We looked at each other like, you saw that, right? So we didn't make it up. So I could trust my brother if he said he saw something like that. But I look over there all the time now, and I don't see anything in that yard ever. Our new dog Lola, who succeeded Maddie, she looks over there all the time. She'll just be sniffing around all of a sudden. And she's part shepherd, so she's got this whole guardian thing about her. And she just starts looking over there with that. And the neck goes up, and like, what do you see? Across from us, at Unity Park, there was a home that looks like Mr. G's house that was in a peach orchard, where our boys came off of Cemetery Hill to return fire at rebels in the home and house who were shooting their rifles up at the cannons on the hill. So there was a little pitched battle right across the street from my house. And Maddie used to do it. She'd lay on the porch with her paws like this, and she'd be staring across the street. Now Lola does it. And I'm looking out, what do you see over here? Squirrels, right? No, there's no squirrels. We're shining a light over. We see squirrels. She's, yeah, like they're watching. So, really? Wow. So, those are my experiences at Gettysburg. I had an experience at Vicksburg, where there's a marker for Grant's tomb. I'm sorry, Grant's headquarters. Tomb's a whole different story. I've never had any experiences there, although I've been there a number of times. But yeah, Grant's headquarters at Vicksburg. The first time I went in 2013, it was the middle of July. We went sweltering in July. But we went in wool because we like that kind of thing. And we got up there. There's one of those wayside things. This is Grant's headquarters. I wanted to pose with the sign. I said, let me light up first. So I had the cigar going. I'm in uniform. I'm leaning on the sign like in a Grant kind of pose. And my buddy was up this little hill from me looking down. And he looks down for me and goes, are you okay? I was like, why? He goes, you don't look good. I said, we're in Mississippi in July. And we're wearing wool. You know, what else do you want? He goes, you don't look right. I said, I feel like I'm crowded. Other than that, uniform's a uniform, but I feel like there's people all around me. And he says, well, consider how you're dressed and where you're standing right now. Because you're standing at Grant's headquarters dressed like him. And you feel like I felt like I was in an elevator with too many people. That's the best way I could describe it. So, who knows what was going on?
I have questions, kind of off.
Sure.
There's all this supernatural stuff. And about tombs.
'Tis the season.
You've probably heard all the crazy stuff about Lincoln's tomb?
I've heard some things.
People stole his.
Oh, that was weird how that went on, yeah.
And then they put him in concrete.
Right, eventually,
I don't
yeah.
remember the details.
Yeah, not long after he was buried, there were people doing things. That was one of the reasons Grant didn't want to have a burial. You know what I mean? Like he wanted to go into Arlington, but he was afraid Julia wouldn't be allowed to be put in with him. And he wrote her this impassioned letter when he couldn't speak anymore about he wanted to make sure they could rest eternally. So he said, find a place in New York City, you know I'm fond of it. And she picked the site where the tomb is.
I don't know if I'm the right guy, because I'm not that up on this.
Yeah.
Is it true? Was Grant a short guy?
He was about 5'9", 5'10".
Oh, okay.
We're about the same height.
One of those guys they said was.
Oh, well, McClellan was short. Sheridan was about 5'2", 5'4", somewhere in there. There's a door at the City Point headquarters that used to be on the cabin that Grant had at City Point in Virginia. His headquarters right outside of Petersburg. They have the original door that was on that cabin. And there's a picture of him standing at that door where there's a notch in the door by his head. And the first time I was visiting, the ranger took me inside. Of course, you go dressed, right? You go in uniform. He took me inside, had me stand next to that door. And we posed where I line up height-wise where that notch is for Grant. It's like, see, don't tell me I'm too tall to be Grant, because there's proof where the door is, right there. Because they preserved that door for whatever reason it was notched. But yeah. One or two other... Lola and I, my dog Lola, we got run off the battlefield last winter by something. Cemetery Hill, right by our house. There's the inn, the 1863 inn, and the house where Jenny Wade died is right up the street from there. And I've never had any Jenny Wade sensations, by the way. But Lola one night, you know how dogs, it's for them to smell, right? So you let your dog take me where you want to go. This is your walk. You want to smell. So Lola was new to us about a year or so, and she was still learning everything about being on a leash and everything else and learning to trust. So I let her go. And we go up on the leash. We went around the Baltimore Pike, past the Evergreen Cemetery gate and all that. And she decided she wanted to go on this side where the Hancock statue is on Cemetery Hill, where the cannons are. And there's no light up there. I have my Norfolk Southern conductor's lantern that's like this beam that will burn your eyes out if you blast it with it. So I have this really bright light that I can put out where we're going, and I always take it on our walks. So she's smelling, and she's like she's on the scent of something. And we wind up going straight down the hill. We didn't even go down the road anymore, but we went straight down the hill to the park road that butts up against the football field for Gettysburg schools. And that's right along where the park ends. And then on the backside of Cemetery Hill, there's a neighborhood with a cul-de-sac. And just regular houses up there. But before you get to that are the regiment markers that the units had put out, and their left flank and right flank markers, like everywhere else on the battlefield. And she's dragging me through all that. She stops in the middle of that park road before we got to the edge. And I'm thinking Sleepy Hollow. Like Ichabod comes up to the covered bridge, and he knows he has to get across and all. It had that feel to it. And she starts growling. Looking further, she did that lean forward. The ears almost went all full shepherd, because she usually puts them out to the sides, but the ears went almost full shepherd. The teeth came out like Cujo. I saw the hair on the back of her neck going up, and her tail went out straight. And she says, just like lurch. And I'm looking like, light, put the light on, because I want to see what's there. And nothing in front of us. Because my first thought was, great, we got a skunk. Because we do get skunks that even come into our neighborhood. So nothing there. So come on, let's go. So we start walking again. Now she's looking off to the right into the woods, and she's still snarling, and she's looking back at me like, why aren't you snarling? Because something's there. And we took a couple more steps. I shined the light around, so well, let's go. And I felt this push from behind. I didn't feel hands on me, but I felt like this pressure, like a wind almost. And it was like full on.
Like solid air.
Yeah, solid. Yes, like the trash compactor in Star Wars is closing and it's pushing me along with it. And I'm like, come on, Lola, let's go. It wasn't feeling very friendly. And then we got to the part where the neighborhood started, and it stopped. It stopped entirely. And I'm looking back like, what just happened in there? And I got this feeling like, we don't want you here at night. Be in here with your dog, Okay, deal. We're not going back in there at night. I did have a feeling of a hand on my shoulder once in the house I told you where my grandmother died. I don't think that was her, unless it could have been. But I was home on Christmas leave during my 6 months at the Armed Forces School of Music. So I was home for 2 weeks in December. And my parents had moved my bedroom out of the bedroom it was in into the attic. Because I'm not there anymore. So that's where I could sleep for the 2 weeks I was there. And I was just about asleep, facing the wall, my back to the room, and I felt icy fingers, and I felt a thumb on my shoulder, on this shoulder. Like I felt like the thumb and the fingers on my shoulder, and I felt it pulling me to roll me over. And I woke up out of that, and I sat straight up. And I felt distinctly the fingers, and it was ice cold. So next morning, Kevin, let me tell you what happened last night. I told my brother about it. He goes, yeah, I never liked sleeping up there. I always felt like somebody was watching us. Oh, really? Yeah. So who knows?
Basements and attics there.
Yeah. Well, in our basement, now the house we're in now was not there at the time. Our house was on the property of John Rupp, who had a tannery. And in fact, where I parked my Jeep, I'm told by one of the licensed battlefield guides, where I parked my Jeep was the corner of the beam house for Mr. Rupp's tannery. So the rest of the grounds were for other processing of the leather stuff. But the homes were built in the 20s. And there was an old woman living in our house that was getting ready to, she wanted out. She was going to go live like at Cross Keys Village or one of these other retirement communities. So she was getting out. And our landlord was looking for somebody to rent to. We got wind of it, so that's how we met him. And we moved in July. She used to have paintings on every space available on all the walls. So when we moved in, we had all these discolored marks where the paintings had been, and nails and nail holes everywhere. So we went to town fixing all of that. And a couple other things. We changed the place for how we wanted to live, how we wanted. A couple weeks in, my wife was out to go, she was innkeeper at the Tilly Pierce house, so she was out till like 6 o'clock. And for whatever reason, she was going to drive that day. So me and Maddie at the time, we were in the basement, and and I had our cellar door to the basement open so I could see out to the parking behind our house, because that way I'd know she's coming. I could let the dog out to go greet her. So we're in the basement, and I'm doing woodworking, whatever I'm doing, and we hear across the joists from the first floor. And Maddie and I both looked up, and then we looked at each other. And I said, Mommy's home. And tail starts going, and she's like, yeah, maybe. We heard, or again, because usually by then my wife is like, oh, I'm home. You know, she yells down the steps to us or something. And didn't hear any of that. She's not on the phone because we would have heard her on the phone. And I looked out, and her car's not out back. And I looked at Maddie again, I said, I don't think that's Mommy. And Lola and I have heard it too now, the other dog. We've been down there and we've heard the footsteps. And I wonder if it's the old woman that lived there, because she threw a broom at me on the back porch. Not then, a different night. I was unlocking our back door. We have a back porch that's covered, screened and all. And we just had a broom on the far corner of it. And I'm doing the lock, and all of a sudden I saw this broom coming. And I caught it. And I said, don't throw stuff at me! And I threw it back. And I said, don't ever do that again! You're lucky you're still here. And then I went into the house, and I haven't had a problem since. Nobody believes me about that.
Just testing.
But it was, you're like, I caught it. Like, how do you get, out of nowhere, this thing was coming at me. It was coming like Fantasia, where it was like, coined up with the bristles down here. It wasn't flying like a Harry Potter broom. It was coming at me like she just was moving it at me for whatever reason, and I caught it. I guess, yeah. And I said something to the effect, if you don't live here anymore, we live here now. I said something like that. I said, you really need to go find a better place to be. So that's about all you can do in this situation. All right, so I have dominated this thing. I know there's other people that have ghost things they want to share, so now is the time, because you're going to walk out of here going, this guy's nuts with this ghost stuff.